since he negotiated his much-touted Brexit deal in 2019, Boris Johnson and his successors have been trying to renegotiate the contentious Northern Ireland Protocol, but to no avail. That was until yesterday, when after months of guarded negotiations, Rishi Sunak finally unveiled his much-anticipated Northern Ireland Protocol deal with the EU. So in this video, we'll take a look at what's actually contained within the deal, the controversies around some of the elements within it, and whether this could finally put the issue of Brexit to bed. For now, at least. First things first, the deal itself, aka the Windsor Framework. At its core, the framework recasts arrangements between the two sides on three key areas: the flow of trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Northern Ireland's place within the Union, and the democratic deficit. First, the flow of trade question. Now, this part isn't actually all that new. In fact, it's been government policy since about June of last year. But the Windsor Framework formally means that the flow of goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland will be split into a green lane, comprising of goods destined for Northern Ireland only, and a red lane, goods destined for the EU. For goods in the green lane, all unnecessary red tape will be removed, including the likes of officially signed customs certificates for individual food products and customs declarations for consumer parcels. In other words, vastly reducing the friction for goods going from Great Britain into Northern Ireland. Goods in the red lane, however, would still remain subject to a full suite of EU laws, checks and controls, just as before. When it comes to Northern Ireland's place in the Union, under the old protocol, Northern Ireland was treated differently from the rest of the UK when it came to a number of key areas, including VAT, excise rules, pet travel requirements, medicines, and even sausages. The Windsor Framework, however, contains, quote, substantive and legally binding changes to address that, ensuring that Northern Ireland benefits from the same VAT and excise duties, for instance on alcohol, as the rest of the UK. Additionally, the UK's medicine regulator, and not the European Medicines Agency, will approve medicines for the Northern Irish market. Plus, crucially, all food sold in Great Britain will be allowed to be sold in Northern Ireland too, including goods which may be banned in their entirety in Ireland, including staples such as Lincolnshire sausages. Finally, the democratic deficit part of this is arguably the most interesting and undoubtedly the most difficult part of this new deal to negotiate. Previously, Northern Ireland was not only subject to all existing EU rules and regulations, but to future EU rules and regulations too. The argument on the EU side being that if you're going to have access to their single market, you've got to play by their rules. Under the new framework, though, that's about to change. Some 1,700 pages of EU rules will no longer apply to Northern Ireland, narrowing the range of EU laws applicable in Northern Ireland to less than 3% according to the EU's own calculations, with those 3% of regulations being strictly necessary to maintain Northern Ireland's single market access. The framework also establishes an emergency mechanism, the so-called Stormont Break. Under the Stormont Break, changes to EU customs, goods and agriculture rules within the scope of the original protocol can effectively be vetoed by the Northern Irish Assembly. This replicates the petition of concern procedure contained within the Good Friday Agreement, whereby if 30 MLAs, that's members of the Northern Irish Assembly, from two or more different parties come together to sign a petition, the Stormont Break will be triggered. However, MLAs won't be able to stamp on the break willy-nilly. Rather, under the terms of the framework, they must demonstrate in a detailed and publicly available written explanation why the rule in question has a significant impact specific to everyday life that is liable to persist. Now, as soon as this does happen, the UK will trigger the EU that the break is being triggered, and the rule in question will be suspended automatically from coming into effect. The Joint Committee of the UK and EU will thereafter enter into intensive discussions on the issue at hand, with the rule only being subsequently reapplied if both the UK and EU agree to it. In other words, the UK holds an unequivocal veto that is not subject to the ECJ's oversight. However, it's worth noting that this break would only be used as a last resort. So that's what the new deal looks like. resolving some elements of the original deal and allowing both the UK and EU to make changes to improve things on both sides, giving the UK and Northern Ireland more control while sticking to the EU's original requirements. However, it's safe to say that the deal hasn't exactly been plain sailing. According to some reports, the deal wasn't even really done on Monday, but days or even weeks before, with the delay coming as a result of the two sides having to work out how to sell it to the British public. That's because in order to be able to present and ultimately pass the proposal, we'll get back to that in 1 second, Rishi Sunak will need the backing of MPs in Westminster. Now, while the Labour Party has consistently said under Keir Starmer that they would constructively support a deal, it wouldn't really play politically well for them at the moment. As a result, Sunak will likely need the support of his own backbench MPs, including backbench Brexiteers, most notably the European Research Group, or ERG. And in order to get them on side, Sunak will also need the support of the Northern Irish Democratic Unionist Party, or DUP. Now, previously, the Brexiteers and DUP had two issues with the protocol in its old form. Firstly, they said that it required too many checks going across the Irish Sea, which the DUP didn't like because they considered it a threat to the Union, and the ERG didn't like because they considered it needless and costly bureaucracy. Secondly, both sides took issue with the fact that the old protocol reserved a place for the European Court of Justice, which both the ERG and DUP saw as a violation of UK sovereignty. So, does this new deal resolve both issues? And will it get the DUP's stamp of approval? Well, firstly, on the matter of checks, while the green and red lane solution doesn't remove all checks, it does vastly reduce bureaucracy, and is a recognition, by the EU at least, that Northern Ireland is part of the UK, and thus ought to be treated as such. So, a broad tick for both sides on this one. The problem, though, is ECJ jurisdiction. Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, was at pains to stress that the European Court of Justice will remain the final arbiter of EU law. And while the UK government's command paper stresses that there's no ECJ jurisdiction over the Stormont break, the question of what role the ECJ will play when the Stormont break is deployed unjustly in the eyes of the EU is yet to be seen. The thing is that a lot of this is yet to be seen. Sunak has seemingly done a good job of getting the EU on side and reaching an agreement which is broadly acceptable to both the EU and to his government. An agreement which hasn't been possible on this issue for a number of years. The problem is that other stakeholders, both in Great Britain and on the island of Ireland, haven't really had their opportunity to show their support or concerns just yet. We don't really know if the ERG in Westminster or the politicians in Northern Ireland will go for the deal, or if they'll try and shoot it down once again. As such, this may be a brave move from Sunak. If successful, the gamble could look like the action of a powerful and influential Prime Minister, one who was able to get done what others pretended to do, something which could potentially boost his polling rating. However, it's not a done deal either, with political opponents, and even a certain former Prime Minister, potentially seeing this as an opportunity to take Sunak down and further damage his reputation. In any case, the DUP sniff test is not only important to get the Brexiteers on side and resuscitate Sunak's reputation, but it's also needed to get the Northern Ireland executive back up and running. That's because the DUP have ultimately refused to re-enter power sharing in Northern Ireland in protest to the current protocol. And under the Northern Ireland model, this means that the executive just can't function again until the DUP are happy. And this is ultimately where the Stormont break itself plays its strongest card. The DUP will want the ability to veto EU regulations, but for them to be able to do that, the Northern Ireland executive have to be functioning in order to pull the brake. As such, the DUP are now heavily incentivized to re-enter power sharing, and in turn, tacitly support this proposal. Anyway, as you can clearly see, the stakes are very high for this new proposed deal. If accepted and welcomed in the coming days, Brexit could finally be done, and Sunak could see himself praised for a savvy political play. However, if opponents, even within his own party, decide that now is the moment to strike, that would exemplify quite how divided the Tories and the Union as a whole remain. And in that case, Sunak ought to be worried. Before we go, if you appreciate our content, especially our urgent videos like this one, then consider supporting TLDR by picking up our brand new and limited time notebooks. These books proudly display the floor plans of notable buildings from British politics, including the House of Commons, Parliament, and number 10, 11, and 12 Downing Street. More than just featuring a cool design though, each book also has a QR code on the back, which when scanned will take you to an exclusive TLDR video explaining more about the buildings themselves. Now, we first shared these books a couple of weeks ago, but due to excess demand, we are still fulfilling some of those orders. As such, and because we've had to order more stock anyway, we thought it'd be worth reopening the store one more time. So these books are available for just a few more days, exclusively using the link below. Thanks for your support, and thanks for watching TLDR.